As RotoPat would say, hello everyone, and welcome back to the latest Week 7 waiver wire Q&A. RotoPat is currently in mourning. I believe he will be in mourning for the next 3 days over the loss of David Montgomery, who expected to miss a few weeks with a rib injury. I believe they called it a cartilage issue. I saw the play. As someone who had a lot of David Montgomery in DFS, and he came in at like 10, 12%, I'm like, oh, every touch for a really good offense, but an offense that also loves to run the football. We're windmilling this. Felt very good. And then he goes down and falls just directly on the football. And it appeared to bust up his ribs. Pat, not handling it well, as you'd expect. One of the leaders of Demont Nation, as he calls it. He's the only one who seems to call it that, but neither here nor there. He is out this week. He is out tomorrow for the, I have no clue what they call the show with Denny that I'll be on tomorrow. He will be back. I believe he has all of his columns posted anyways. He has his Week 7, fantasy fallout, I believe is what it's called, posted, if not now, soon. And he will be back for the Thursday preview show. But for now, for this show and for tomorrow, it's just me. Tomorrow will be me and Denny, but just me this time. So go ahead, fire off your comments in Twitch chat. If you're on Twitch, go ahead and fire them off on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, it's a really, I'd say good waiver wire week. I hate to say it because good waiver wire weeks typically follow rough injury weeks in the NFL. That's just the nature of the beast, is that when there's a lot of good pickups on waiver wires, it's because there were a lot of injuries in real life football. But for us, that's an opportunity. It's a chance to improve our fantasy rosters. And we haven't really gotten great chances. Since like week 2 or 3, somewhere in there, we kind of dried up. We didn't have any of these 1-for-1 replacement backs. There was maybe some chances for it last week. We thought we had it with Amari DiMercato. Not at all the case. We did have it with Chuba Hubbard. He was a very strong pickup. He was rostered in something like 30 to 40% of leagues, if I remember correctly. I wrote him up, so I should remember. But he was still, if you were able to get him, turned out to be the best waiver wire pickup. I think I had him as number 1 in my waiver wire column. He looks like a good runner, and he can at least catch sometimes. Didn't do much of that last week, but did run, I believe, a majority of the routes. So we have that going for us. And then D'Onta Foreman, who, another player I had a decent amount of in DFS, thought he was a very strong pivot off of Chuba Hubbard. I thought they'd play similar roles, and I believe the Bears had a higher implied team total. Didn't quite see the bell cow type of role that we saw from Chuba Hubbard, but it was actually not a bad role for as much as he scored a 7 point something, I think, DraftKings points, PPR points. Maybe it was only 6 something. It was actually pretty solid. He saw something around like half of the team's total carries, which includes the Justin Fields and eventually Tyson Bagent attempts. And he ran a majority of the routes, if I remember correctly. He ran the most routes. I'm not sure if it was a majority or just a plurality. But anyways, last week, some hits, some misses in terms of the overall waiver wire ads and more short-term ads. I think we'll get Roschon Johnson back this week. I believe he is rostered in over 50% of Yahoo leagues. I can actually check that right now. But to me, I think he's over 50%, so I did not write him up in the waiver wire column. If he's not, very clearly the best ad. I think once he returns, which it's only a concussion, 52%, just barely over. Maybe I'll go back and add him just for security's sake. Hey, you should check. I don't, for most of the people playing in leagues that I'm talking to, you're watching a live stream on Monday. For most people, Roschon's not available in your leagues. You're in serious hardcore leagues. But if Roschon ends up being available, he's clearly the top ad. He looks like, they're using him, or were using him before he suffered the concussion, missed last week, but they were using him as a option on the 2-minute drill, as a pass blocking back, but he's got the size and he had the rushing efficiency, not production because he was parked behind Bijan Robinson, but the rushing efficiency of a guy who can also handle his business on first and second down. So Roschon, I'm actually, as we say this, I am going to add Roschon into the waiver wire column because he's just over 50%. I make exceptions when it's really important to get a guy's name in the waiver wire column. He's the top ad, but for the people who say, not in my league, understandable. I only make very few exceptions for guys over 50%. There are some really good ads this week, even without Roschon available in just under half a league. So go ahead, fire your questions away, fire your comments away. I'm going to start ripping through them. Let's see what we got here. First question we have: I'm in the unfortunate position of owning Javonte Williams and Dameon Pierce. I blame Denny for 0 RB brain. Should I roster Jaleel McLaughlin or Devin Singletary? This is a good one. I think this is my bias showing, because heading into the season, I was very high on Javonte Williams and less so on Dameon Pierce. As we saw his preseason usage, I actually felt solid about him. I was disappointed I hadn't been drafting him more because his price rose. And again, I felt a little sheepish at his price once it rose. And I felt like, I should have gotten in when he was cheaper. And Javonte, as his price rose, mostly because it was based on health, I was like, yeah, I'm totally in on this guy. Turns out both of them are, as you said, you're in an unfortunate position of having both of these guys on your roster. To me, I would still probably be trying to rock with Javonte Williams. I just think he's a superior talent to Dameon Pierce. It's probably splitting hairs, but what we're seeing from Pierce is last year, he was contributing very little in the receiving game. He was close to the bottom of the league in yards per route run, and he was a big tackle breaker, but he wasn't doing a ton. It was sort of the Najee Harris problem. When Najee Harris gets cooking, he's a good tackle breaker. That dude is hard to bring down. That's the same with Dameon Pierce, but he wasn't breaking a ton of long runs. Now he's not breaking as many tackles, but he's still also not breaking the long runs. It's an offense that seems perfectly fine running the whole system through, and you would understand this, through CJ Stroud. So, and now they're, I think you're alluding to, not just involving Devin Singletary. I think he saw more snaps than Dameon Pierce this past week. I'm going to go with Javonte Williams, who I think is more likely to have a 12-touch game where he still gets you to 80 yards and a touchdown. Is that likely to happen in every week? Obviously not, but I'm not sure Dameon Pierce has that in him. I think he's much more of the 20 carries. He's getting stacked boxes every time, and he's still averaging 4 yards a carry. But that's not the most useful situation to be in for fantasy purposes. He's not seeing goal line work. He's not doing anything on passing downs. So I'm going to take Javonte Williams. I think he has a chance to be the most efficient back of the two, and both of their roles, as you're kind of hinting at, are, I'll say, disappointing. They're very disappointing. So I guess when I say I'll take Javonte Williams, I mean I will roster Devin Singletary as sort of a hedge on Dameon Pierce. I think the only strong argument for Jaleel McLaughlin is probably better than Dameon Pierce. I mean, yeah, I'd say he's probably better than Dameon Pierce, but our sample size on him is so low, and the team's commitment to Devin Singletary apparently seems to be higher than the Broncos' commitment to Jaleel McLaughlin. And I think really what's happening in the Denver backfield is that Javonte and Jaleel are just proving to be better in all phases of the game than Samaje Perine. Devin Singletary, I don't want to say he might be better than Dameon Pierce, but he might have more utility, and that he can go out and pass block, and he can go out and run routes where Dameon Pierce doesn't excel in those areas of the game. So, long-winded answer, roster Devin Singletary, but that's mostly just a reflection of my view on Javonte Williams, which is understandably biased. Lindorphins back in the chat like every single week. Appreciate you coming out, Lindorphins. One of the more obvious questions of the week, assuming CMC misses time, Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason. Feels like maybe they were just being cautious with Mitchell coming back from injury. Yeah, I totally think that part of what we saw, I think, was 2 carries. I don't know if he got targeted. He definitely didn't catch a pass. 2 carries, -3 yards, which is disappointing for Elijah Mitchell last week, was that he was coming back from, I think, a 2-game absence because of the knee issue. I think it was not his only time popping up with the knee issue this year. And he's just suffered a litany of lower body injuries throughout his career. I think probably the most likely outcome is something like, just in terms of running back touches, a 60-40 or like 55-40 split in favoring Elijah Mitchell and Jordan Mason. We've seen in the past, and even this year when he's healthy, Elijah Mitchell goes out and is the clear number 2. But I've got to imagine, after seeing last year and multiple times this year, and I think in the preseason as well, or at least before the start of the season, that what we've seen from Elijah Mitchell, and at least what the team would interpret from Elijah Mitchell, is that he's great on a limited amount of touches. He just can't stay healthy. So to me, that tells me that if we see one back emerge, probably the median outcome is that I think a really talented, but maybe physically fragile back in Elijah Mitchell gets more carries or more snaps, more overall touches, whatever way you want to measure it. But to me, that is this guy has a high floor and a very low ceiling situation. Whereas I think it is just as likely, or it's probably slightly less likely, but in the neighborhood of as likely, that Jordan Mason goes out and sees significantly more touches than Elijah Mitchell. Not because he's better. I actually think Elijah Mitchell is really good. As someone who drafted a lot of him in best ball, I think he's really talented. But if the team is gravely concerned with his health, especially we saw last week, he got 2 carries, -3 yards, right? Because he was still coming back from this knee injury. What's to say they don't do that again this week and give Jordan Mason the bulk of the work? I believe Mason saw 5 carries last week. He out-snapped, out-routed, and out-carried Elijah Mitchell. I think if we're playing for a near-term win, which as far as I know with the McCaffrey injury, it doesn't seem like it's a long-term issue. If we're playing for a near-term win, the guy coming off of 2 carries, fewer snaps, fewer routes, fewer overall carries is not the bet we want to make. If McCaffrey was sidelined from here to the end of the year, I'd probably put my chips on the Elijah Mitchell table. But if I think one guy has a chance to go out over the next 2 weeks and touch the ball 30 times, maybe even 40 times, I think that guy is Jordan Mason. So I'm putting, and in my waiver column, I kind of talk about this. I'm putting my chips in on the guy who I think over the next few weeks can provide me, if he's the starter for 3 weeks or even 2 weeks, 2 or 3 spike weeks, because I don't think the CMC injury is going to be a long-term issue. We'll see about that, but it doesn't seem like it'll be a long-term issue. I'm trying to score as many points as I can if I'm bidding on someone in this backfield with my fab budget over the next 2 or 3 weeks. That guy is probably more likely to be Jordan Mason. Elijah Mitchell is probably the most likely to get to 9-10 touches. But if one of these guys goes out next week and gets 20 carries, I think that guy's more likely to be Jordan Mason. I'm not sure we'll see that from Elijah Mitchell again in his career, given how injured he's been, and given we saw last week that they did go out and use Jordan Mason in the second half. I think McCaffrey went down like the second quarter, if I remember correctly. Wasn't my game that I was blurbing, so I have to read the blurbs on that one. But we saw in the second half that they were clearly favoring Jordan Mason. So I'm shooting for the moon with Mason because I think Mitchell is just rather unlikely at this point in his career, especially, 2 weeks removed by the time we get to Sunday, 2 weeks removed from just coming back from that knee injury. I think Mason's the guy who's likely, or is more likely, to go out and get 20 touches. In reality, probably neither of them does that, but I want the guy who could maybe single-handedly win me a week, maybe 2 weeks. We'll see. So I'm going Mason here. I think it's more of a ceiling bet, but that's what we want to be doing right now. It's almost always what we want to be doing. So moving on, we have Antonio Rodriguez says tight end standard, Luke Musgrave, or is this for, oh yeah, I assume this is just a waiver wire pickup, Luke Musgrave or Jonnu Smith. Still give me Luke Musgrave. We saw him being used downfield, plenty of targets, enough routes, and that was 3 or 4 games into his career before he suffered the concussion. I'm going to say that in the long term, the starting heavy route runner, super athlete, and running, I don't want to say deep downfield, but for a tight end, his ADOT was really high. I'm going to take that guy over Jonnu Smith, who understandably is actually running, I think, about 2/3 of the routes since week 1. So it's not like he's not involved, but he's still a team's number 2 tight end. It just happens to be on a team that uses both tight ends a lot. It's sort of another shoot for ceiling type of outcome. Jonnu Smith, over the long run, can probably turn in tight end 14 numbers. He's getting the ball enough. He's on the field enough that, yeah, he has I don't want to say high floor. Almost no tight end at this point has a high floor, but he has a floor. Luke Musgrave, coming off the concussion, I don't think he saw a ton of routes last week. And even then, he's not seeing a ton of targets because his targets are farther down the field. It's harder to earn those targets. Maybe Jonnu Smith outscores Luke Musgrave. Maybe that's even the most likely outcome. But if one of these guys is going to be a 50 yards a game, getting end zone targets type of player, it's Luke Musgrave. And especially in standard where I'm just trying to bank touchdowns, I want the super athlete who's moving the chains more so than I want Jonnu Smith, who's a good bet to see some amount of targets on any given week. So I'm going to go Luke Musgrave here over, I assume that's Jonnu Smith. I hope I didn't wax poetic on this for like 2 minutes and it's the wrong Smith. Standard 12-team league. JJ Taylor, DeAndre, is that I assume that's Jonathan Taylor, and you just double type the J. It'd be very weird for it to be J. Oh, Justin Jefferson, Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, Kyron Williams, Khalil Herbert, one would assume, Jalen Warren, Olave, Waddle, Thomas. Who do I try to trade to upgrade at receiver? I mean, I guess if you can start 3 receivers, you should probably look to upgrade. But Olave Waddle is like a somewhat slam dunk to me, 1-2. I talked to Denny about this on the recap show. I believe he had that Dolphins game. And Waddle, like, his game is coming. There is almost no doubt that Waddle's game is coming. 2 weeks ago, he saw 4 targets in the end zone. Last week, they tried to connect with him on, I think it was Denny said or something. It would have been like a 40 or 50 yard touchdown. Just couldn't come down with it. His game is coming. So I would say, in terms of who do you trade, I doubt you can get anything for Khalil Herbert at this point. It's possibly DeAndre Swift, I assume it's just, who is JJ? I don't know who JJ is. I'd maybe, depending on how your league mates feel on DeAndre Swift and Kyron Williams, look to move off of them. But I don't think you're in a bad spot at receiver, especially because I think Waddle is probably going to get his breakout game any week now, and Olave is just a certified stud. So what do we got here? Trade Kyron for Pacheco and Thielen. I'm in a 14-man league. My other running backs are Bijan, Brees, Ramondre, wide receivers Addison, Higgins, and Godwin. Yeah, that feels fair. And this is from someone who really likes Kyron, but in a 14-teamer, Addison, Higgins, Godwin. I believe Higgins is on bye this coming week as well. Godwin, I'd say he just at this point is clearly his team's second receiver. I'd say you do need another receiver on this roster. And it's easy for me to say this when I really like Bijan. I absolutely love Brees. And I still have some hope for Ramondre. Some hope. It's definitely not as good as we thought it would be, given how terrible the offense is. I'm actually not that concerned with how much work Zeke is seeing. Ramondre is still clearly ahead of him in every usage metric. So I'm fine rolling out Bijan, Brees, and when those guys are on bye, flipping in Ramondre. You don't need Kyron right now, and you can't play him this coming week. So you still get a usable running back for when you have Bijan and Brees on bye. And I talk about my best all teams a lot, but it helps me frame where I started and where we're at now. I don't think I drafted Thielen once. There are very few players I don't draft once. Players fall below ADP. I trust that the market has some level of knowledge and that I should respect that and say, oh, his ADP is this. That's a good predictor of where he's going to be. I can disagree with it, but then when he falls significantly past that, I don't want to claim that I know so much that I can't take a value. But I did that with Adam Thielen. Boy, did I ever do that with Adam Thielen. And he is just jamming it down my throat. He is telling me that I was wrong. He is not washed. And he's right. He looks really good. So yeah, I'm fine. I think you should probably make this trade, Kyron for Pacheco and Thielen. It's the rare 2-for-1 that I support the 2 side of it. Any thoughts on Keaton Mitchell activated but no snaps? Edwards is a plotter. I guess Hill has some juice, but I feel like Keaton could be a dynamic piece of the offense if given the chance. Yeah, I actually thought we would see a little bit, but yeah, like you said, he had 0 snaps. He's a really interesting prospect too. He got a ton of work at ECU, if I remember correctly, made the roster as a UDFA, and then they had to sneak him through by making the roster, putting him on IR. You have to be in a deep league, though, to stash him, because as much as I want him to be a thing, Justice Hill, like you said, he has utility, right? He has something. He has a little bit of splash play potential. And more importantly, he can pass block. He can play on passing downs. That would eat into Mitchell's potential role. And Gus Edwards, he's a plotter, but he's good at that. He's like one of the 10 or 15 highest career yards per carry guys. So they have role players. And all that needs to happen is Gus Edwards stays above 7 or 8 carries. And then Justice Hill stays above 40% of the routes, and there's not a room for a third guy. So I want Keaton Mitchell to be a thing. I stashed him on some dynasty leagues. I looked around for like my FFPC main event. Is he available there? And as much as I think that he's an exciting stash for my FFPC main event team, where we have Ty Montgomery on that team. We dropped Sean Tucker and then just added him back because we're like, oh, well, We need someone, even if he's the third running back. We need to be throwing darts at running back, but he is buried deep in that dart throw. I think he's probably talented, but he's also a guy who racked up touches and yards at, what is ECU? Are they like a CUSA team, an AAAC team? What is that? American Athletic Conference. So it's not like he's a certified stud. He's a fun dart. More worth the stash during bye weeks. Keaton, Tajay, Javonte, Diontae. Is that Javonte Williams? Like, one would assume that's Javonte Williams. It's easily Javonte, unless I'm forgetting a different Javonte. Any receivers you see as a possible breakout candidates later in the year? I'm thinking in particular Quentin Johnston and Jaden Reed with Green Bay. I like the Johnson one. I have not checked, but I don't. Is Josh Palmer going to play tonight? I haven't checked a little site called Rotoworld for the news, but for my money, I'm going to say one, check your waiver for Jameson Williams. He was owned in just shy, I think 49%, just shy of 50% of Yahoo leagues. So check for that one. Although, that's probably not available in your league. We'll see. And for me, it's Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice is leading all the Chiefs receivers in yards per route run. I haven't checked the last run, like the week 6 run of yards per route run on PFF, but he had a really good game. So I would guess he's probably somewhere in that top 15 to top 10 range. He was like 12th a week ago in yards per route run. And we saw last week was the second time he earned a route rate of 50% or more. They've been treating him as a role player. So I would say similar to what we saw, better, but similar to what we saw with Sky Moore last year. But unlike Sky Moore, they've had chances where they've given him more routes. Some of them have been blowouts. Some of them have been not in blowouts, more important games, more important scenarios. But the fact that he's super efficient, and they're at least toying with the idea of giving him more routes. And then last week, I believe Justin Watson dislocated his elbow, which sounds really painful, but didn't suffer any ligament damage. I believe that was the sort of diagnosis. Out for probably definitely multiple weeks. It's whether it's like 3 or 6, something like that. That's going to give him at least the opening to keep earning routes, keep proving himself as somehow like the only meaningful receiver this team has. So I think Rashee Rice, and I have him in the waiver wire column, is my favorite. This guy could be a wide receiver 2 in week 10 or something like that, assuming Jameson Williams isn't available, because he's about 50-50. What else do we have here? Roschon Johnson or Jordan Mason? Roschon, easy. I think he's really talented. Khalil Herbert out. He was put on injured reserve heading into last week, so that counts, I believe, as his first game miss. Khalil Herbert out at least 3 more weeks. Travis Homer banged up and is a special teamer. And Deonta Foreman, he's a solid pickup, but they healthy scratched him for weeks 2, 3, 4, 5, I believe. So to me, Roschon has a chance to go out and be a 3-down back. And this isn't true of every scenario, but a lot of times players can come back from concussion and immediately resume their role, especially given that he suffered it on a Thursday, gets to sit out not just 7 days, Sunday to Sunday, but 10 days and comes back. I hope at least he comes back to practice this week. So for me, Roschon is as I mentioned at the top of the show, kind of the premier pickup right now. He's owned in just over 50% of leagues, but I'll make an exception for him. Let's see what we got here. No. All right, here we go. Lindorphins. I have Tyreek, AJ Brown, Ridley. All right, what are you doing asking questions here? You've got a championship roster. You just wanted to brag about these guys. Looking to trade away a wide receiver to help at running back. Lost J.K. Dobbins, Akers. Yeah, dud. Want to keep Hill, of course. You want to keep Hill and AJ Brown, but which of Ridley and Nico would you prefer to keep versus trade away? I'd actually rather trade away Ridley. He's the guy who you drafted higher, but Nico's usage has just been off the charts. He is truly seeing wide receiver 1 usage. Ridley is there as well, but Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram remain, I don't want to say thorns in his side, because it's not like it bothers him, I'd imagine, but more so players who are more than good enough to prevent him from seeing elite wide receiver 1 usage. Jags offense is it's pretty reasonable to say Jags offense is better than the CJ Stroud led Texans offense, but it's not like he's getting a ton of targets on the Chiefs. It's a better offense, but it's not night and day better. So I would say if we're seeing a ton of usage for Nico Collins and good, but not elite usage from Ridley, and the offenses are at least in the same neighborhood. They're not, one's better, sure, but I think you can almost certainly get more for Ridley. I think at best, he only projects for marginally more fantasy points than Nico. I think there's a strong argument based on Nico's usage and how well CJ Stroud is playing that you could just say Nico straight up projects for more fantasy points rest of season than Ridley. So I'm going to say playing the market, you definitely want to move on from Ridley. Not that he has a bad outlook going forward. I believe he saw more targets than Christian Kirk in back-to-back weeks, if I remember correctly. But Nico's just a certified number one. His offense isn't as good, but I don't think it's as far as people think. D Hook says, which QB would you release from 2 QB Superflex League? Derek Carr or Daniel Jones? Derek Carr now. Oh, you've got some stinkers on your hands here. Let's see. Daniel, I think it's Daniel Jones. I think heading into the season, we would say, okay, Daniel Jones, almost certainly the best fantasy and probably real life option among the three. He has definitely given up the throne, or at least has entered the mix of any other mediocre QB2 in terms of his actual talent. Just truly picked apart over the first few weeks. His offensive line doing him no favors, but he also walks into sacks like you've almost never seen anyone do. The guy is just gravitating towards pressure. So I don't think he's that much better. I don't even know if he is better than Derek Carr. He's probably better than Howell, to be fair. Speaking of walks into sacks, oh boy, Sam Howell, I think on pace for 96 sacks would be the NFL record by a country mile still. But Daniel Jones also hurt. I'm going to say if you got to cut one, I think you're cutting Daniel Jones. Yeah, I think that's my answer. Whew. All right, what else we got here? What do you make of Trey Tucker? He looked like a spark plug during the blowout versus the Bills and then wasn't used several weeks before popping back up. Am I crazy or is there something? It's probably not something in that, like you said, we see this pop up versus, even if it's a blowout versus the Bills, but then completely disappears again. I feel like this is going to happen with a lot of like late day two. I mean, it's happening with Marvin Mims, and I think Marvin Mims is incredible. You see this happen with a lot of these. Starts the year off with 10 routes, and then they jump up to a higher route share. You need to see it sustained for a significantly longer time than 1 or 2 games, especially if that game happens in blowout, for me to buy it. Not because I don't buy the talent, especially, I relate it to Marvin Mims. I really buy the talent on Marvin Mims. But at the end of the day, we got to get routes. It's the problem with, like JSN. It's the problem with Rashad Bateman that I think I'm somewhat confident that these guys are talented. At the end of the day, these guys score fantasy points primarily by being on the field and earning targets while they're on the field. Really tough to do that if you don't earn routes. So I think I might have Trey Tucker on like one of my favorite dynasty teams, but it's a rebuilding team that is so bad that I can afford to spend meaningful roster spots on someone like Trey Tucker. So in a regular season long league, I'm not holding him. In a deep dynasty league, sure, hold, but what do you expect from him? Not much. I mean, it's just going to be difficult for him to actually produce fantasy points if he's not on the field. And even if he gets on the field as the season wears on, it would have to be in a scenario. I don't see a scenario in which he's on the field with Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, and he's earning a meaningful amount of targets. Those guys are so good. They deserve to get the ball on nearly every play. So it's tough. I think maybe if like Adams gets traded or something, there's a chance for a small breakout, but there's just not room in the offense. And now we're seeing like Michael Mayer get more targets, get more routes. I also think he's really good. So it's tough. I wouldn't have much hope for him. Will Diontae Johnson become fantasy relevant? Absolutely. I mean, he talk about earning targets. The guy is targeted an incredible amount. He is, anytime he steps on the field, he's played with Devlin Hodges, Mitch Trubisky, Ben Roethlisberger, Kenny Pickett, obviously. Every single quarterback he has says, I'm going to target this guy a lot, no matter who it is. Deep thrower, short thrower, check down guy, all of them. Throws at Diontae Johnson a lot. Maybe even if you're in a standard league, he's still getting a lot of yards. But I'll say if you're in a standard league, understandably, his lack of touchdowns, more than a little bit frustrating. But will Diontae Johnson become fantasy relevant the moment he steps back on the field? Maybe give him a week if they don't ramp him up to full speed right away. But the moment he's running his usual share of routes, he absolutely will be. Even if he's like disappointing us as a guy who is inefficient on a per route or per target basis and isn't scoring touchdowns, he consistently goes out there and picks up. I mean, look at his past 3 seasons. 147 targets, 169 targets, 144 targets. Does he do a lot of those targets? No. I wish he would do more with them. But 882 yards, 1161, 923. At his worst, he's like a very frustrating wide receiver 3 when he's scoring no touchdowns. But I mean, in 2021, 8 touchdowns, 2020, 7 touchdowns, extremely normal numbers for a guy of his ilk. Obviously, last year runs incredibly bad and drops passes. Part of it's running bad. Part of it is catch more passes and turn them into yards after the catch, ideally. But he will immediately be fantasy relevant. The real question is, does he come back and usurp George Pickens as the wide receiver 1 on this team? I say yes. I'm going to say the guy who's averaging 150 targets per season over the past 3 years gets more targets than George Pickens. Maybe he doesn't usurp him as the wide receiver 1 by fantasy points, because he is, like, I definitely think it's fair to say Diontae Johnson will be chronically inefficient. That's part of where he sees the ball and what he does or does not do with the ball. He'll average fewer yards per target than the average receiver. But will he see more targets than George Pickens from the moment he runs 80% of the routes? Maybe not the first game back, but from the moment he is in his typical role and then goes forward. Yeah, I'm going to say he sees more targets because that's what he does. It's his entire bread and butter. This question, is Thielen for real? Yeah, he's definitely for real. Like I said earlier, I didn't draft. I literally may have drafted somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 or 200 best ball teams. I might have drafted 0 of this guy. There's like I think I drafted 0 of him. He's just proven me wrong. There's like no, he's going to regress. He can't keep getting away with it. He's scoring touchdowns at a high rate. He's breaking long plays. No, there's none of this. Thielen is as legit as it gets. He's clearly his team's number 1 receiver. He's run a route on 91% of the team's dropbacks, has a 28% target share, 31% air yard share, targeted on just shy of a quarter of his routes. He's got like legit wide receiver 1 numbers. I think, like I said, Denny and I talked about this. Denny's like, maybe we can call him a top 15-ish receiver. I'm going to guess he's like the PPR wide receiver 9. Let's go with that. If anyone's still paying attention in chat, just take a guess. If you could do me a favor, don't look. What do you think Adam Thielen, we're 1 game away from finishing week 6. What do you think his PPR rank is? I'm going to say it's wide receiver 9. He has been so good. It's been brutal for someone who doesn't have him, but that's what's going to happen. In chat, what do you think he is? I might have been actually low on where he went. Oh no, I wasn't low. He's so much better than I thought. Okay, so thank you for everyone. Sorry if I kind of spoiled the answer. Vinny says 6. I have a 15. And then Chad says 7. Before Monday Night Football, I believe Keenan Allen, even after missing a game, might actually jump him. Missing a game. He was on his bye week, so he's 1 game short. Adam Thielen is the wide receiver 3 in PPR league. Someone says 8. He's the wide receiver 3. I think maybe, actually, I don't even know if CeeDee Lamb can catch him, right? Actually, I don't think CeeDee Lamb can catch him. Yeah, no one, maybe Keenan Allen can catch him. But even if Keenan Allen catches him, he'll be the wide receiver 4. He's been so good. He is legit a wide receiver 1 on his team, and he is dominating the targets. Myself included. I think, what did I say? I would have guessed like 8, 9, or 10, something like that. Wide receiver 3. Come on. He's as legit as it gets. Maybe he wears on as the season goes on, and he regresses, in terms of just how much he can produce and how much opportunity he can earn. But him falling from where he is could easily still mean wide receiver 1 numbers. I'm making the wrong decision every week between Pitts and Logan Thomas. Do you have a strong weekly preference for one, or just play based on defensive matchups, or flip a coin every week? I mean, I'm a sucker who drafted Kyle Pitts in so many leagues. And I will say, one, his market share numbers are elite. He is seeing the highest percent of his team's air yards among tight ends, at least. And I believe he is also top 10 in target share. Yeah, he is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 exactly in target share. And he, unless things change drastically, yep, he remains number one, tied with Darren Waller for number one in air yard share. And even though even though the Falcons offense is uncomfortably run heavy, his market share numbers are so good that he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 actually in targets. He's first in air yards. I don't even need to look at that one. He is first in air yards with 106 air yards between him and the number 2 tight end, Darren Waller. Even if you throw out the market share stats, somewhat understandable. I think market share stats probably tell us a lot about who a player is, but they're not going to tell us as much about the fantasy points they'll score, because market share numbers don't care that your offense is terrible. Targets actually do care. Raw numbers of targets. He's still seeing an incredible number of raw targets, still seeing a ton of air yards. I'm generally leaning towards Pitts. I think maybe there are some matchups where you convince me Logan Thomas is a better play. But for the most part, I'm still ranking Pitts as a top 8 or 7 weekly tight end. And Logan Thomas is on that 1-2 border. He's probably more so on the inside of the border as a tight end 1, but not quite up there with Kyle Pitts, because the Pitts usage, even if you adjust for his terrible offense, even if you adjust for the very poor quality of targets he's seeing, is still very good. So I'm in on Kyle Pitts. But what's new? I've been on Pitts every week. It started to work out recently, though. We started getting some money back after being destroyed for a few weeks. Going into this weekend, or in this week, I need to start Ridley, DJ Moore, Watson. Probably still Ridley and DJ Moore. Oh man, DJ Moore's gonna be so brutal without Justin Fields, which already wasn't great, but we did get that really good run. But Tyson Bagent, man, that ain't it. Ridley and Watson. We're not doing DJ Moore, Tyson Bagent. You think Arthur Smith has backed his way into making Pitts and Jonnu both must starts going forward at a bad position? I don't think Jonnu is quite a must start, because he's still not running. I think he's running about 2/3 of the routes since week 1. He didn't play much in week 1, if I remember correctly. I don't think Jonnu is a must start, but he is certainly startable. He's probably going to rank more in that tight end 13, 14 range for me, although there's a bunch of buys coming up in week 7. So maybe he sneaks into the top 12. Pitts is a must start, assuming you didn't go like 2 really good tight ends, assuming you didn't draft Laporta and Pitts, for example. But for most teams, Pitts is a must start. Jonnu is a start. He's not, you don't have to start him. Certainly there are teams that drafted other tight ends who will be ahead of him, but he's very much startable. I have him in the waiver wire column as a clear add. I think it's going to be tough for him to find a weekly ceiling without a touchdown, because he doesn't run all the routes and he's the second best tight end on his team. Arthur Smith has made it so that he is at least startable, even despite that configuration. Is Kenneth Gainwell worth a roster spot, or should I drop him? I mean, it just depends how deep your league is, but I think the worst case scenario for Gainwell, and I don't want to say it's playing out right now, but it's sort of what's happening right now, is that you just can't start him outside of really deep leagues where you're in kind of a bad spot at running back. But should anything happen to DeAndre Swift, he could very easily walk himself into 15 carries, 5 targets a week on one of the best offenses in the NFL. Week 6 withstanding, not a great performance from the Eagles. I still think they're a very good offense. So, yeah, he's worth holding in most leagues. I get more shallow leagues, 10-team leagues, or leagues with shallow benches. You're looking for production. You can't be holding on to handcuffs. There are like 8 handcuffs on the wire that would be very exciting ads. But I think in your average fantasy league, he's probably still worth holding. Who's your top sell high and buy low right now? I get that they play tonight in a few hours, but I am still buying Tony Pollard. I get that his efficiency has dipped, but it's not dreadful. He is still, I think he's still positive in rush yards over expected. And more importantly, honestly, I don't care about his efficiency that much. He's on pace to set the record for red zone carries. He's on pace to have one of the best end zone in terms of like inside the 5 goal line seasons for a running back in the past 20 years that I can find data on that type of stuff. There is very much a world in which he has like 10 touchdowns right now. And I don't say that as like an exaggeration. He has like 24 or more red zone carries. He's got a ton of goal line carries. And he's a guy who doesn't need those carries to score. At least he didn't in previous years. Maybe things have changed. I think that's possible. But I want the guy he's on a good offense. I don't think they're probably as good as they could be based on the coaching. They're still a good offense. he's getting every single carry in the red zone, in the end, near the end zone, and they want to get him the ball there. It's not like he's, say, a Chiefs running back who, Isaiah Pacheco sees all the red zone work. They don't run in the red zone, so it doesn't matter. This team runs in the red zone, and this team gets there often. So he's my very big buy low right now. Sell high, give me a second. Let me get back to you on that one. I'm trying to think of someone who'd be a good sell high, but I don't want to give you a bad answer. So let's see. Rate this trade. All right. I'll try and get back to your sell high. Who's a good sell high? I don't have one right now. I'll get to that. I'll try and get back to it. Rate this trade. I'll fire through these. Got like 5 or 6 more questions back. 5 or 6 more questions, and then I think we're out of here after that. Rate this trade. Giving up A-Chain for Mark Andrews and Devonta Smith. 3-2 record, might be 3-3. Running backs Pollard, Swift, Javonte. Wide receivers Ridley, Puka, Nico, Garrett, Justin Jefferson on IR. Yeah, I think that makes sense to get Mark Andrews. You didn't say your tight end was, but I think he's still the number 3 tight end. He might be the number 2 tight end. As we saw, turns out taking Justin Jefferson away from the Vikings made them suck. Who would have thought such a thing? Yeah, it's as much as, yes, TJ Hawkinson will see more targets sans Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson not converting a ton of first downs, keeping the chains moving, making the offense better, also takes away volume from the entire offense. So I like that in this situation, you are by far, most teams aren't, but you are far from a lock to make the playoffs. I don't know if you can afford to hold on to Achane for the next 3 weeks if he comes back right away, which is not a given, though I guess it does seem kind of likely. So I like getting Mark Andrews. And I like buying low on Devonta Smith. So moving on. Is trading Amon-Ra, Breece, and Higgins worth getting back Tyreek, Terry McLaurin? Amon-Ra, Breece, and Higgins. I think you want the Tyreek and Terry side. Terry not quite living up to expectations, but he still is team's clear number 1. It's more so he's number 1 on an offense that is spread out. It still has number 1. And Tyreek is on pace to annihilate the receiving yards record. He's on pace for like 2,300 yards. The record's 1,964, if I remember correctly. He's, especially with McCaffrey a little dinged up right now, going to be the most valuable fantasy option for the 2023 season. Assuming it doesn't get hurt. It might not even be close, depending on if McCaffrey misses like multiple games. Thoughts on Mixon and Aaron Jones? Aaron Jones, I'm concerned with. I think he comes back this week, but he also came back once already and then immediately, I guess, re-aggravated the injury. And the offense looks more fraudulent every time we see them. Mixon, I don't think he's good anymore. He's been all right at sometimes. I think he's probably lost another step this year, but sort of like Tony Pollard in that, to some degree, I just don't care. I think the offense will continue to be good. They weren't great last week or yesterday, I guess. But he sees every single end zone, red zone touch. It doesn't even have to be in the red zone. Touch for this team. That's a good offense. So Mixon, I feel good about in that he's going to have some big touchdown weeks. Aaron Jones, I am more suspect on. Looking to trade for a running back too. Any suggestions who I should get? Maybe low value right now. Let me get back to that. I'll try and find the sell high and I guess one more running back. I don't want to say buy low, but at least a running back you could take a shot on if I can find. I'll just pull up the Yahoo list and see who we got here. Actually, a running back too you can buy right now, I have it pulled up already, is Roschon. I think as soon as he comes back, we see really good usage from him. So there you go. Let me see. How many weeks would you give Gibbs if healthy while Demont is out to make it a long-term decision? Give Gibbs if healthy to make a long-term decision. I think it's tough. I think it's going to be relatively binary. The moment he's back, I forget what the report was, if it was Schefter or whatever. He's trending in the right direction of playing this week. Didn't practice at all last week. I don't know if I'd call that trending in the right direction. Obviously, things can change since Friday. I think the answer is very clear. Whenever Demont is out, we saw this once already, they're going to give him the bulk of the work. He's not quite as good as that between the tackle stuff, but I still believe that if they give him 15 carries and 2 or 3 targets, he's going to be close to an RB1. Maybe he's the RB14. We can bicker about that, but don't really care. And then the moment Demont comes back, it's not going to go well for him. He maybe is fantasy relevant, maybe in the given weeks that Demont is back.
So I think it just depends what your team needs from him. If you need points this week, next week, the week after that, he's a great hold. But if you can afford to give that guy up, Demont is good. Like, the thing is, he's actually not bad. I think he's better than Jamal Williams, and he's playing a better version of the Jamal Williams role when he's healthy. So I think as soon as Demont comes back, he does that thing where he gets 25 carries and all the goal line work. And that just leaves Gibbs hopefully getting 3 or 4 targets and 5 or 6, 7, 8 carries maybe. That guy is on the fringe of fantasy relevance. And I think the team has been very clear about that sort of split. All right. Let's see. Piggybacking off the Pollard buy low and me trying to sell a wide receiver from Tyreek, AJB, Ridley, and Nico. Is AJB too much of a give for Pollard? Half PPR, if that makes a difference. No, I mean, I still have Tony Pollard ranked in half PPR. I can actually pull up my rankings right now, but I want to say he's like the 4th. I got to do a rerun now that actually, no, I updated the Jefferson one, but I do have to rerun after McCaffrey hurt. Still need more information on that. My rest of season, half PPR rankings, I believe Pollard is a top 4 player. I don't know exactly. He'll be a top 4 player the next time I run it. He's seeing so much work at the goal line. I know we haven't gotten there yet. We talked about Denny's regression files. Tony Pollard has been in there. I cannot stress this enough. He's on pace for one of the all-time red zone usage seasons, at least since like the year 2000. That's where I have data pulling from. He should have like 6 touchdowns already. The offense is fine. I mean, they're struggling in the red zone. Part of it's because Pollard can't freaking score from the 1-yard line. But over the long run, we bet on volume. And we bet on talent too. He's really good. He hasn't been as good this year, but he's generally been really good. I think you're fine swapping AJB for Pollard. Maybe AJB actually is like a good sell high for someone. I believe it was Elia. Hope I'm saying your name correctly. A good sell high in that Devonta Smith's role looks to be very, very clearly diminished this year versus last year. He's really good too. AJ Brown's better. I think AJ Brown's incredible. But Devonta Smith is really good and not getting the ball a ton. I would say that's a player that maybe is a buy low, and more so his increase in overall targets could impact AJ Brown. And that AJ Brown has like 4 consecutive 125-yard games or something like that. That's not going to hold up in the sense of we'll see Devonta Smith come back. We already saw Dallas Goedert, very slow start to the year, bounce back 2 weeks ago. So maybe AJ Brown, as much as I hate to say it, is a slight sell high in that I don't think he's even remotely close to someone like Chase, to someone obviously like healthy Justin Jefferson or Tyreek Hill. I think there's a gap there. He'll probably rank as the wide receiver 4 or 3 going forward. But do people want him more right now than, like, how much more do they want him than CeeDee Lamb? I want him slightly more. How much more do they want him than Stephon Diggs? I want him slightly more, but you could probably get CeeDee Lamb, especially CeeDee Lamb, but even maybe Diggs and a little sweetener or something. Whereas I think they're the same. You're flipping coins. All right. I'm going to speed fire through these. Sorry if I didn't get to yours yet. Should I trade Kamara and St. Brown for A-Chain and Tua? No, you should not. Roschon got dropped. Very nice. Should I trade Waddle and Michael Thomas for Adam Thielen? No, we're holding Waddle. We are holding Waddle and we're starting Waddle. Trade Waddle and JT, Jonathan Taylor, for Justin Jefferson. Maybe it could be Addison instead of JT. This so depends on your team. If you can afford to probably take, like, let's say Justin Jefferson doesn't play for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Actually, no. Dude, just keep like last year's 101 and Jonathan Taylor and a 2nd-round pick in Jalen Waddle. I only say that because there's a very clear tail risk that Justin Jefferson misses like 9 games. So, and this also falls in line with me saying Waddle's fine. We're going to get our blow-up game. It is coming. Do I trade Collins and Evans for Pacheco? No. Nico's great. Evans is also really, really, Evans is great too. He's really good. Would you rather Roschon Johnson or Craig Reynolds? I have Herbert and Montgomery. Oh, tough scene. Sorry about that. I would just take Roschon. I think Roschon's the type of player who he could, his situation also helps in this sense, but he could go out, get the start this week, play well, and not give up the role for the rest of the year. Craig Reynolds is not stealing the RB1 job. He could run for 200, just wouldn't matter. Despite the lack of production this season, I love Jacobs' volume. Yeah, for sure. Let's see. I want to move Swift for Jacobs, yeah, definitely. Jacobs' volume is super elite. It's RB top 5 numbers. So, and I like Swift, but we take the guy who gets a ton of touches over Swift, who is still the head of a committee on a team with the best goal line back in the NFL. That's not DeAndre Swift. That's obviously Jalen Hurts. I'm down by 17 with Cowboys kicker on tonight in PPR League. What are my chances that kicker gets me 17 points? Low. They have to be low. Very low. I'm going to guess like sub 10%. Let's assume he gets like his projection is like 2.5 field goals and 2 extra points. 8. Yeah, you're a big dog because, 2.5 field goals is like 12, assuming they're 40-yarders. 2 extra points is like 14. You're a big dog. You're not out of it. You're a pretty big dog, I think. Superflex, I currently have Dobbs as my second quarterback. Daniel Jones, Kyler Murray, Desmond Ridder, Bryce Young, and Pickett available. This is tough. This is a tough scene. I think I might take Desmond Ridder slightly over Josh Dobbs. You're just flipping coins there. I don't think there's a big difference. I'm not taking Kenny Pickett over him. I guess in this instance, I take Daniel Jones. I would, if you can find a player on your roster that is not your second quarterback, because you should be probably starting a second quarterback here. If you can find a player on your roster that's not the second quarterback, I would love to cut someone for Kyler Murray. But that just depends on who you have to cut. It's going to be a few more weeks, I think, before we see Kyler Murray. But him just hanging out there as a potential QB2, I think he is like the ideal stash. I'm thinking about right now, when do I in my 1 quarterback league start picking up Kyler Murray? And 2 quarterback, you probably want to find him. All right, let's see. What are some good contingency plans for Anthony Richardson owners? I mean, seems to be done for the year. That's my read of the situation, is that they are, quote, strongly considering season-ending surgery. There's no reason for him to come back. Don't push him back. Contingency plans are like some of the guys, the person above you, Big Hurt Atlanta mentioned. If Desmond Ritter's out there or if Kenny Pickett got dropped, go and pick those guys up. If not, like, what are you going to do? Like Aiden O'Connell? I don't even know who's going to start. Gardner Minshew, if he's out there, is one of your best contingency plans. Is Sam Howell out there? I don't think Anthony Richardson is likely to play again this year. I think I'd put it 60-40 he doesn't play. All right, last one. Is this a bad trade? Bijan, Dell, and Osborne for Waddle and Breece Hall? No, I like that. I don't want KJ Osborne. He's fine, but he just can't step into those shoes like Justin Jefferson has. He can't even come marginally close. He got like 8 points last week. Dell, still his team's number 2. He's a really good number 2. Bijan is great, but I want to be buying low on Waddle, and I'm fine buying high on Breece Hall. He's incredible. So there we go. That wraps us for everything, guys. Thank you so much for filling out chat. That RotoPat, I thought we might not have enough people, enough content to go around, but you more than filled chat. So with your questions, with your comments, great time. We will be back again with RotoPat this time next week, 6:00, and I will be on some sort of show. I'm still not sure what it is yet. Tuesday, tomorrow at 3 p.m. with Denny Carter. Check out my waiver wire column. Check out Pat's Week 6 recap, Fantasy Fallout, if I remember correctly. Thank you all for tuning in. I will catch you tomorrow or next week if you're tuning in for this show.